go. Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for coming to today's March Zero Suicide Learning Collaborative session. If you are just now entering the room, please again place your name, organization for attendance. But today we have an amazing speaker, Shannon Parkins. To introduce her, I'll share a little bit about her biography and then what she will touch on today. So Shannon Parkin, she, her pronouns, received the Transforming Lived Experience Award from the American Association of Suicidology in 2022 and has presented numerous times on how she learned to celebrate life as she recovered from her disabling suicide attempt. Shannon is also a certified peer recovery specialist on her own organization in Frederick County. Shannon and Dr. Sally Spencer Thomas, some of you may know about this podcast, the Hope Illuminated podcast, conversed on compassion, connection, and recovery intention on how faith communities can best support people impacted by suicide. So if you'd like to hear a little bit more about her story after today's session, please go on to that podcast to listen a little bit more. And she'll be sharing a little bit more today as well. Shannon's essay is titled Learning to Hope After 30 Years of Depression and a Suicide Attempt, and Suicide Survivor Stories Empowered Me to Live, are posted on the Speaking of Suicide website as well. In today's meeting, Shannon Parkin will share her journey to embracing joy after years of depression and a disabling suicide attempt. During her 6-month hospitalization, doctors found the right combination of antidepressants, and she learned to walk on partially amputated feet. Shannon will discuss how her recreational therapist and faith community inspired her to celebrate life, and how leading peer support groups and sharing her story empower her to maintain her mental health. So everyone, please welcome Shannon Parkin. I'll transition to her now.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, I think it's good. I think it's morning where you all are. It's
yes.
Afternoon where on the East Coast. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. And my first slide up. Is that a yes? Jazmin?
Let me get it there.
Okay. Great.
Second, sorry.
That's good. So you set with the slide?
It is up, hopefully. There we go.
First slide, yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to share how I learned to embrace joy after decades of depression and a disabling suicide attempt. Next slide, please. My name is Shannon Parkin. I am a certified peer recovery specialist in Maryland, where I work part-time with Honor and Frederick County, sharing my story and leading peer support groups. I also volunteer with the National Alliance on Mental Illness as an interim voice speaker. I've presented my story more than 65 times across the United States and have led or co-facilitated more than 480 peer support groups. And on this slide, you can also find some of my other presentations that Jazmin mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. Today, I will begin with some background about suicide prevention and encourage you to look at the references on the slides for more information. I will then share briefly how I attempted suicide, with most of my talk focusing on the specific support I received that emboldened me to embrace joy as my recovery progressed. I have some speech deficits due to traumatic brain injuries. So I ask your patience as I speak today. I will use some pseudonyms as I share my story to protect the privacy of those I met on my journey. I hope to convey how peer support can embolden those impacted by suicide to celebrate life. I will show you how recreational therapy and faith communities can empower suicide attempt survivors. I strive to show how hearing how those impacted by suicide learn to embrace joy builds resilience. These slides will be shared with all attendees through the organizers of today's talk. Next slide, please. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline has been in existence for decades. In July of 2022, the Lifeline went from being a 10-digit number to the 3-digit 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you or anyone you know has thoughts of suicide and or need emotional support for mental health and substance use challenges, they can call, text, or chat 988 to receive care anytime from anywhere in the U.S. Empathetic care, including offering to call 988 with those in crisis, can help save lives. On this slide is a link to the 5-minute informational video describing the 988 Lifeline. The National Action Alliance on Suicide Prevention has developed a framework for successful suicide prevention messaging, which you will also see here. Next slide, please. I am trained in Living Works Faith, Soul Shop for Leaders, Mental Health First Aid, Question, Persuade, Refer, and the Trevor Project classes on how to support LGBTQIA youth, all of which I recommend. Next slide, please. Language matters. In an effort to support people who experience suicidal behavior, ideation, and attempts, and treat them with compassion, language use around suicide has changed. Rather than saying committed suicide or completed suicide, words that can perpetuate stigma, we say died by suicide. In addition, for someone who has attempted suicide, it is very painful to hear their attempt referred to as a failure, incomplete, or unsuccessful, when they may already see themselves as a failure in most of all aspects of life. I know this personally as someone who has attempted suicide at least 7 times. If someone attempts suicide, then they need support, empathy, and compassion. I recommend Dr. Stacy Friedenthal's book, Loving Someone with Suicidal Thoughts, What Families, Friends, and Partners Can Say and Do, and Helping the Suicidal Person, Tips and Techniques for a Professional, as well as Dr. Friedenthal's website, Speaking of Suicide. Dr. Friedenthal is a licensed counselor, author, and associate professor at the University of Denver Graduate School of Social Worker, where she teaches suicide prevention. Next slide, please. More than 49,300 people died by suicide in the U.S. in 2023. 1.5 million attempted suicide. More than 50% of deaths by suicide in the U.S. are by firearm. On average, more than 60 people in the U.S. die every day by suicide with a firearm. To put this number in perspective, the largest mass shooting in U.S. history was in 2017 in Las Vegas, when 60 people were shot and killed. More people die every day by suicide with a firearm than the largest mass shooting ever in U.S. history. Limiting access to guns saves lives. I know this personally, as my grandfather died by suicide with a firearm when I was 7 years old. Suicide rates vary by race, ethnicity, age, gender identity, and sexual orientation. Males are more likely to die by suicide than females, but females are more likely to attempt suicide. LGBTQIA youth are at particularly high risk of suicide because of societal stigma they face. Next slide, please. According to Dr. Thomas Joyner's interpersonal theory of suicidal behavior, suicidal desire results from the convergence of 2 interpersonal states, perceived burdensomeness and thwarted belongingness. However, desire alone is not sufficient to result in death by suicide. A third component must be present, the acquired capability for suicide, which can develop from repeated exposure and habituation to painful and provocative events and access to lethal means. I know the truth of this theory as I was in this state of mind each time I attempted suicide, and have talked with hundreds who have experienced this suicidal frame of mind. Next slide, please. Dr. Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General during both the Biden and Obama administrations, wrote, "Together, the healing power of human connection in a sometimes lonely world." 2023, Dr. Murthy issued a Surgeon General advisory on the epidemic of loneliness and isolation in the U.S., calling for the healing effect of social connection and community. I have seen in peer supports when individuals with substance use disorders and/or mental health challenges share their coping techniques and learn from each other, hope grows exponentially. Next slide, please. In a survey published in October of 2022, more than half of all adults in the U.S. said someone in their families had experienced a mental health crisis. Although a previous suicide attempt is a definite risk factor for suicide, 90% of suicide attempt survivors do not die by suicide. Next slide, please. For every person that dies by suicide, it is estimated 360 people consider suicide but do not kill themselves. Stories of hope and recovery have the power to help others and dispel stigma and myths around suicide. Mass media can responsibly report on suicide and present non-suicidal alternatives to crisis. On an individual level, recovery stories have the power to save lives. Millions have attempted suicide and/or have seriously considered suicide, but have gone on to live out their lives fully. These people are flowering gardens of hope blooming. When they feel ready, I hope they will share their journeys. I know hearing the recovery stories of other suicide attempt survivors helped me tremendously. I encourage you to share widely this link on hopeful storytelling developed by the National Action Alliance on Suicide Prevention. Next slide, please. I tell my story for 3 primary reasons. For the first 50 years of my life, I lived in the silent shadow of suicide. I did not realize that people could overcome suicidal ideation and recover after a suicide attempt. So I share my story to give others hope. I also wish to encourage people to care for those impacted by suicide as I was supported. I hope to encourage survivors to share their recovery stories when they feel comfortable doing so. Next slide, please. I am the proud mother of a 23-year-old daughter and 20-year-old son. Throughout my life, I've surrounded myself with children's books. I enjoy swimming and walking. I am also active in my multiracial LGBTQIA inclusive faith community, Silver Spring United Methodist Church. I am fortunate that my faith community supported me after my suicide attempt and understand that this is not the case for many people. I hope that by sharing my story, more places of worship will be supportive and caring to everyone. Next slide, please. I had a few challenges growing up, as many people do. Both my parents struggled with major depression and suicidal ideation. My grandfather died by suicide when I was a child, but mental health was never discussed in my family during my childhood. Both my parents were married 3 times, and I was the only child of the middle marriage. Given my complicated family, I joke that I received training in diplomacy from the womb. I moved schools, cities, and sometimes countries and parents every year from 4th through 12th grade. My mother, father, and stepfather are all university professors for more than 40 years each. Looking back now, I know I had depression, anger turned inward by my early teens, but told no one. My older half-brother used to tease me by putting a blanket over my head when we're children. I thought I was being smothered. This happened so often when I was a child to this day, I still cannot wear anything on my head. Fortunately for me, I have thick hair. On the other hand, I know I was privileged as a white middle-class youngster and was never without shelter or food. When I was 17 in 1984, I accidentally fell 25 feet while hiking on Navajo Mountain in Colorado. Some amazing friends ran down the mountain and called Flight for Life. Other friends sat with me on the mountainside until a helicopter flew me to a Boulder hospital. I suffered a traumatic brain injury. I was comatose for about 4 days. I have no memory of my hiking fall or the first 2 weeks afterwards. And I will go off script here for a moment and say I did go back and climb that mountain 2 years later. And my heart, part of my heart still lies in Colorado because some of my best years when I was a teen were spent in Colorado. So this is a real joy to talk with you all today. My mom contacted Bryn Mawr College and delayed my admission a year. During that year of rehabilitation, I had outpatient therapy and attended a junior college. I swam competitively through middle and high school. After my hiking fall, our swimming club coach welcomed me back to the team, even though I was slow and uncoordinated. Gradually, my skills returned and I resumed swimming competitively. With the hope of becoming a neurologist, I majored in biology, focusing on neurobiology. Unfortunately, despite those grand aspirations, I struggled and often isolated myself to cope. I had difficulty with crowds, needed at least 9 hours of sleep, and could not multitask. I overexercised and developed a pattern of eating only one meal a day, often in my room. Eating in the crowded dining halls was a challenge for me. Breathing, talking, and eating with many people around me was more than my brain could handle. Because of my traumatic brain injury and a family history of alcoholism, I avoided alcohol completely. Instead, I became addicted to exercise and undereating as I attempted to control the world around me. I was sent home at the end of my junior year for anorexia. I returned to Bryn Mawr for final semester and was able to graduate in 1989, majoring in biology and minoring in psychology. However, there's no way I could pursue a medical degree. In 1992, I received my master's in environmental health from University of Washington. I moved to Maryland in 1993 and began teaching occupational health and safety around the country for a nonprofit. I married in 1996. On the surface, I had made a full recovery, but the reality was different. I still struggled with anorexia and depression. I was asked to resign my job in 1998. I tried teaching at private high schools, but ran into difficulties, crowds, loud noises, and any situation where I had multiple distractions continued to overwhelm me. When I became pregnant, I began to feel better. My children were born in 2001 and 2004. I love my kids with all my heart. When they're small, I focused all my energy on them. I drove minimally before the birth of my children, but after I was in 2 accidents, I lived in fear of driving. After my daughter was born, I stopped driving completely. I was unaware of my negligence of matters relating to housekeeping, and my cooking skills were minimal. They still are, very minimal. My irregular eating patterns from my college years persisted. My marriage dissolved in 2010. After a couple of years, I was able to get on Social Security disability, but still had severe depression. Next slide, please. In May of 2015, my damaged brain told me to end my life. I walked to the metro station one morning and jumped in front of a train. Every day I give thanks that I survived and recovered fully. Reverend Michelle Johns, the former minister of reconciling and congressional care at my faith community, who is also a licensed independent clinical social worker, taught me to breathe and be gentle with myself. In turn, I encourage you to breathe and be gentle with yourselves. Rescuers and doctors saved my life. I suffered multiple broken bones and another injury to my brain. Doctors had to amputate the front portion of both my feet. I have no memory of my suicide attempt or the first 6 weeks afterwards. Next slide, please. During the first days of hospitalization, my friend of 30 years, Marita, sat beside my bed singing, "It is well with my soul." Very appropriately, their father took full custody of our children. A member of my church, whom I will call Olivia, was on the train I jumped in front of. Olivia went to church that Sunday morning and offered prayers for the woman who had attempted to end her life without knowing it was me. Reverend Michelle led the prayers that morning. My first memory is when our lead pastor at that time and a friend brought my daughter, who had just turned 14 years old, to see me in the hospital 6 weeks after my suicide attempt. Through the unconditional love in my daughter's eyes, I began to see hope offered by the world. I spent 6 months in the hospital, including 4 months on the behavioral health unit, where I learned to walk again on my remaining half right foot and 3/4 of a left. Doctors found the right combination of antidepressants for me. After my hospital stay, I moved into the first of several assisted living facilities where I would reside for 5 years. At a local medical clinic, I began electroconvulsive therapy that I continued for more than a year. At each session, electrodes were taped to my forehead. I received an anesthesia, so I was sedated while my brain was electrically stimulated. Nurses held my hands as they placed the IV and stood beside me with smiling faces when I woke at the end of each session. I did present a challenge to them, as the usual way to determine responsiveness under a sedative is monitoring the toes. This was not possible in my case, as I have only partial feet, but those nurses adapted and never lost their ability to smile, encouraging me to do the same. Next slide, please. While I was still hospitalized, my friend Ellen called the helpline of NAMI Montgomery County in Maryland. With NAMI's help, I connected with a group of therapists to travel to their clients, driving and accompanying them to places we need to go as we move forward in our recovery. This was crucial for me because I do not drive and at the time could not go anywhere independently. I met Debbie, a recreational therapist with 40 years of experience. Through her, I learned that recreational therapy supports people in their recovery through enjoyable activities. When Debbie asked me when I'd found moments of joy in my life, I told her that after months of hospitalization, I just longed to be outside. I asked if we could go on walks in local parks during our time together. Debbie and I conversed and learned about each other as we strolled on neighboring paths. As I became more comfortable with her, I recall one of the first times we laughed together is when we agreed that while I would miss wearing flip-flops, I was glad I would never again be asked to put on a pair of high heels. Debbie encouraged me to return to reading children books that I've shared throughout my life. She helped me enroll in the training class offered through the Literacy Council to teach adults how to read. For more than a year, I met weekly with an Egyptian woman teaching her how to read picture books that she then read with her grandchildren. When I told Debbie that I'd swum competitively in high school and college, she took me to the local pool. I was not afraid of the water since I spent so much time in pools during my younger years, but I was concerned about what people would say when they saw my partial feet. I recalled Debbie's hand on my back as she steered me into the locker room for the first time since my suicide attempt. I was met with the familiar smell of chlorine and began to relax. After a few times at the pool, I soon realized people rarely mentioned my feet. They may have stared, but given that I am basically blind without my glasses, I couldn't tell. I was just happy to be in a swimming pool where my feet mattered little. Next slide, please. Residing in assisted living facilities for almost 5 years, I learned from my fellow residents. Often the caregivers are so overworked, handling all the laundry was a real challenge. I often washed my clothes in the shower. I recall one morning feeling sorry for myself as I stepped out of the shower after wringing the water out of my laundry. I heard the woman who lived across the hall from me, whom I will call Dee, yelling, "Help me." Dee was a retired lawyer and a Howard University graduate with multiple sclerosis who was wheelchair bound. She had dropped her TV remote control and could not reach it from a wheelchair. I picked up the device, handed it to her, and kissed her forehead, wishing her good morning. Smiling at me, she exclaimed her favorite 3 words, "Keep hope alive." As I left her room, I saw her drawers overflowed. The caregivers had no time to fold her laundry. By the next morning, my lens had shifted. I realized that being able to wash my own clothes while standing in the shower was indeed a privilege. I knew how easily I could also be in a wheelchair. I found satisfaction in neatly folding my clothes into my drawers. I enjoyed talking with Dee and as I organized her clothes under her direction. Early in my recovery, I attended some meetings of people who had experienced traumatic brain injuries. I recall at one meeting sitting across the table from a nonverbal young man who was wheelchair bound. I had given a long-winded description of an incident at the assisted living facility. The young man responded concisely through the talking board, strapped to his chair with words I have taped to my wall I've had taped to my wall for the last 7 years. It takes time to smell the roses. This brave man who on the surface seemed so disabled taught me a wonderful lesson that day about the importance of relishing each moment of happiness the world offers. Next slide, please. After my suicide attempt, my faith community, Silver Spring United Methodist Church, was wonderfully supportive. During the months when I was in the hospital and the years I resided in an assisted living, one church member sent me cards on every holiday, even St. Patrick's Day. Those old-fashioned cards with real stamps meant so much to me. I recall one Sunday morning in early 2017 standing in the chapel after a service feeling rather confused because I was having electroconvulsive therapy twice a week at the time. Our lead pastor looked at me directly and said, "Shannon, you will always have a home here." I became friends with an older couple who joined the church at the same time I did. Over time, I began calling them mom and dad because I saw them as my church parents. They visited me every week throughout my 6-month hospital stay. This wonderful couple supported me throughout my years in assisted living facilities, even helping me move when I was transferred from one facility to another. These consistent, caring relationships guided me to a hopeful future. At one church service, my church mom said to me gently, "Your shoe is untied. Would you like me to tie it for you?" I was so proud to be wearing real tennis shoes instead of the brace up to my knee that I'd worn previously. I'd forgotten that tennis shoes need to be tied to be effective, but my church mom was there to remind me. Church also provided a place where I saw my children weekly. Next slide, please. One Sunday, I was reading The Little Blue Engine That Could by Watty Piper with preschool children while my daughter, then 16 years old, sat behind me with one arm draped over my shoulder. With the other hand, my daughter reached to the end of my right shoe. As I read the story of the little engine that made it over the mountain, because the dolls and toys cheered her on and gave her confidence, my daughter squeezed repeatedly the empty toe of my right tennis shoe. She leaned into me as I read the story. My right forearm has significant scarring from the injuries I sustained from my suicide attempt. On my right elbow is a skin graft that appears as an extra patch of skin. I recall while in the hospital in a group session on the behavioral health unit, another patient refused to sit beside me because she said she did not want to, quote, catch no tumor, referring to my right elbow. After that incident, I asked if the skin graft could be removed, but was told my insurance would not pay for what they termed cosmetic surgery. For the first 3 years after my suicide attempt, I always wore long sleeves when I was around my children so they would not see my scarring. In May of 2018, on a warm day, I asked at church, first my daughter and then her younger brother, if it would be okay if I wore short sleeves around them. They each told me they were ready to see my scars. About 2 months later, my daughter, then 17, sat to the right of me in a church meeting. For the first 15 minutes of the meeting, she massaged the extra skin on my right elbow. At the end of the meeting, she turned to me and said, "Mom, it's okay you have a wiggly elbow." I knew then that I would never again consider having my wiggly elbow removed, for it is a constant reminder of how life embraced me, pulling me back from the edge my mental illness had taken me. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. Okay, thanks. In April of 2018, my psychiatrist told me he thought I was ready to ride the metro again, but he wanted me to ride with my recreational therapist, Debbie, at first. I rode with her weekly for a month before I was given approval to ride independently. I used specific imagery to overcome my fears. Next slide, please. By coincidence, on that first ride, Debbie and I both wore orange t-shirts. When we reached the platform, I looked at Debbie's face, not at the tracks, as the train pulled into the station. Debbie took my hand and we boarded the train. We agreed we'd ride only one stop before turning around and returning. We found a seat close to the door because my partial feet didn't give me the bounce needed to stand on a moving train. At the next station, my confidence rocketed when the door opened. As we stepped off the train, I reached my hand back for Debbie. She said, "Let me just switch my bag to the shoulder so I don't trip you." I joked with her by saying, "Yeah, that would not be something you'd want to put on your resume." We laughed, standing together on the metro platform. I still focused on Debbie's face as I heard our train approach the station, but this time I didn't have to fight the urge to cover my ears. Next slide, please. Debbie and I rode the metro together every week for the next month. On our third trip together, as we stood on the platform, I told Debbie about the phone conversation I had had the previous night with my daughter, that it ended when my daughter and I had shared the words, "I love you very much." At that same moment, I saw a mother bidding goodbye to her own daughter, a toddler in a stroller, by making a heart shape with her fingers. By focusing on the paired image of the heart-shaped fingers and the echo of my own daughter's words, "I love you very much too, Mom." I was able to watch the train arrive at the station with the smile on my face, something I'd never dreamed possible. By using that same imagery on our next trip, I found I could watch the train arrive at the station without fear. 2 weeks later, in May of 2018, 3 years after my disabling suicide attempt, my psychiatrist gave his full approval for me to ride the metro independently. I happily shared the news with my faith community as I sat with Olivia, who had been on the train I stepped in front of in 2015, and my church parents. 2 months after I began riding the metro independently, I learned Olivia would be leading a group from our church to go to a baseball game. The group would be riding together on the metro. I wanted to go, but I was worried my presence on the train would cause church members to be uncomfortable. Very tentatively, I asked Olivia if I could join the group. Without a moment's hesitation, she said, "Definitely, we've got your back, always have, always will." With those words and a successful trip to the ball game, I knew I never had and never would walk alone. Next slide, please. In July of 2018, when I saw my psychiatrist, she wrote in the line for my diagnosis, "For the first time in my life, depression in full remission. After 40 years of major depressive disorder and the storms of 7 suicide attempts, a rainbow lit up my sky. My depression has been in full remission ever since, which means I still live with mental illness, but have learned coping strategies I use daily. This picture, taken 8 years after my disabling suicide attempt, shows my daughter and me at our college graduation, depicting the joy I embrace now, a future I could not envision when I was suicidal. On World Suicide Prevention Day last year, Kaiser Permanente shared on all their social media a portion of my recovery story, which includes this picture. Next slide, please. I have been writing the Metro independently since 2018. On July 1st, 2023, I had the joy of writing the Metro with my daughter, then 22, for the first time since my suicide attempt. We rode to a nearby town where we visited several bookstores and had lunch. As we rode the Metro back, when we reached the train platform, by chance, we happened to sit beneath this sign for the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. My daughter said to me, "I'm glad they have these signs here now," as she held my hand. All by the moment, I nodded and said, "Yes, so am I," as I squeezed my daughter's hand. Next slide, please. I will always remember the first time I heard a NAMI in her own voice speaker share how they recovered after decades of mental illness and attempting suicide. That day, my eyes opened to the possibility that I may one day progress far enough in my recovery to share my story. Having lived with depression for 40 years, my mental illness has always been like the smothering blanket my brother used to put over my head when I was a child, limiting my ability to breathe freely. The stigma and shame of being a suicide attempt survivor with the disabling injuries and additional heavier blanket enveloping me. Hearing that man describe his journey, I felt the smothering blanket lifted, allowing me to inhale and walk forward as I learned to celebrate life. In January of 2019, I completed the training to become an inner own voice speaker. Those NAMI trainers encouraged me that I could still share my story, despite my obvious speech deficits from my traumatic brain injuries. I wanted to share my journey to embolden others to celebrate life. Next slide, please. The first time my children saw my bare partial feet was 4 years after my suicide attempt. We were swimming together at a friend's neighborhood pool. In the bright sunshine of the day, each of us climbed in the water and began to swim and splash. After about 20 minutes, my 18-year-old daughter sank beneath the water in front of me as I stood in the shallow end, talking with my friend and my 15-year-old son. After about 10 seconds underwater, my daughter reappeared and said, "Mom, this is the first time we've seen your feet." I asked her and my son if they had any questions. My son taught me to focus on what I can do now and in the future, rather than my regrets or the toes I lask, by asking me only a single question. "Mom, can you still do the butterfly stroke?" I smiled, swam the length of the pool and back, doing a passable butterfly, although probably not competitively legal. Both my children said, "Mom, I'm proud of you." Another morning in 2019, I was reading with preschool children at a bookstore. My 4-year-old girl, a 4-year-old girl whom I will call Emma, was sitting in her mother's lap and asked me to read a finger puppet book about a little puppy. I asked her if she would like to control the puppet with her fingers while I read. Emma removed her hands from underneath her mother's arms and said, "I can't do that." All of her fingers ended at the first knuckle, and her thumbs were also abbreviated. I encouraged her to act out the part of the puppy while I read. She joined in with enthusiasm, making barking sounds as I read to her, and another preschool girl there with her mother. After I had finished reading, I approached Emma's mother and asked if it would be helpful for her daughter to feel the empty part of the front of my shoes, telling her I walk on partial feet. Her mother told me Emma also had no toes and had had multiple surgeries since her birth and was due to have another surgery the following month. Though I was trying to talk quietly with her mother, Emma seemed to know exactly what we were saying. She walked over to us, sat down on the floor, and took off her shoes. Emma asked me to show her my feet. The other little girl sitting in her mother's lap watched what was happening. I looked at both mothers, and when they nodded, I took off my shoes. Emma appeared fascinated that my feet were also short. She took off her socks. Emma then asked me to take off my socks. Challenge from a 4-year-old. some of the most challenging. I looked at both mothers, and when they nodded, I took off my socks. Emma looked at me and said, "Gross, you do not have any toes." I told Emma, "That's okay. My feet work for me, just like your feet work for you." Both of us put our shoes and socks back on, and the mother of the other little girl told her daughter, "Everybody is different." When Emma went to play in the little tent in the story corner, her mother apologized for what she had said, saying that her daughter was repeating what other children had said. I told her that I understood and I thought it was natural her daughter repeated what she had heard. I wanted Emma to know that I was all right with my feet as they were. Before they left, Emma showed me tricks she could do with the little nurse soccer ball she was playing with, and we began kicking the soft soccer ball back and forth. I wish mother and daughter the best with Emma's next surgery. Next slide, please. During the first month of the pandemic, I still resided in assisted living. Initially, I was told to stay in my small suite, consisting of a bedroom, a tiny kitchen area, and a bathroom. I was more anxious than ever to move and live independently in my own apartment, but my psychiatrist had to approve the plan. I spent the first month feeling very discouraged. But then I realized I could choose to remain unhappy or try to find the positive, even in these difficult circumstances. I thought about what I'd learned in earlier years in assisted living from my fellow residents who rarely left the building. I resolved to focus on gratitude. I began keeping a daily gratitude log of every phone call and interaction I had with my children, friends, and church members. I was grateful for my church friend who dropped off groceries for me weekly. I wrote of my happiness of seeing a bird flying with wings stretched wide outside my window. During those early months of the pandemic, Reverend Michelle called me every week. In one phone conversation, as I described my gratitude journal in detail, Reverend Michelle appeared unusually quiet. I asked her why. She replied she didn't want to interrupt me. I told her, "Please don't worry about interrupting me. You certainly can't step on my toes." We laughed together. This conversation was one of many examples of caring people supporting me as I learned to find humor in my situation. In October of 2020, I was given approval to move into my own apartment. Church members helped me move. Reverend Michelle gave me a wooden plaque that reads, "The best is yet to come." I strive to live up to these words each day, envisioning a future of light and laughter. 4.5 years have passed since I moved into my own apartment. I continue to keep my gratitude journal. Initially, I started it to prove only I could live on my own. Now maintaining this log is as much a daily practice for me as taking my antidepressant medication. Earlier this month, I wrote day 1800 in my gratitude log. One of the things I'm thankful for is this journal itself. It gives me the opportunity to chronicle the gifts I receive and the lessons I learn as I work through challenges. Next slide, please. In September of 2021, my church mom passed away from cancer. When I heard the news, I wept and then went for a walk. I felt the wind against my face and heard nestling chirp. I saw a bird soar across the sky. I felt my church mom's presence with me. I reflected on how she taught me that I cannot change my past. I can't shift the lens I use to look at what has happened, learning from both my regrets and joys. The memory of her words guides me to move forward, past my mental health struggles, to stride forward, to celebrate life, always learning. I've been asked how I cope with any shame I feel about my previous actions caused by my mental illness. Of course, I regret that major depression caused me to jump in front of a train. However, through my supporters, I've learned to lift the prison walls of shame and guilt and step boldly into a future, embracing joy. Through peer support groups, I have learned. I continue to learn. Next slide, please. On Easter Sunday, 2022, Reverend Michelle announced from the pulpit as I sat beside Olivia and my church dad that I won a national award for sharing my recovery story. I traveled to Chicago to receive the Transforming Lived Experience Award from the American Association of Suicidology. at their conference. I realized that I had received the award not on my own, but because of the people who supported me. I have never walked alone. As Dr. Ken Duckworth writes in his book, You Are Not Alone, The NAMI Guide to Navigating Mental Health. Through the guidance of Honor and Frederick County, a peer-led recovery organization, I became a certified peer recovery specialist in Maryland in 2023 and began working part-time for Honor and Frederick County in June of 2023. Next slide, please. I spent decades never knowing anyone could recover after a suicide attempt or get over suicidal ideation. Perhaps you all have your own recovery stories or have clients on this path. We need you to talk and write about your recovery. I found my lens of hope and grace and know you will too. Resilience is built through community. With each story, hope grows exponentially. Believe in your recovery and shout it out. I am filled with gratitude that I've learned to dance in the rain and play in the puddles of life, even without toes. Final slide, please. You will see my contact information on the slide. Email is the best way to reach me. Please contact me if you'd be interested in my sharing my journey with those in your community, and or if you have suggestions on how I can improve my presentations in the future. As I learn from each presentation I give, thank you for listening and all each one of you does to share hope. We now have a few minutes for questions.
Shannon,
Go ahead.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I guess just my name is Allie Nieves and I work at Vale Health Hospital. And I was just curious if there was anything you learned or you've learned that you could share that a hospital care team could do differently or better to care for someone in a suicidal crisis.
Thank you for asking that question. What I was in emergency rooms in many places, and they can be very challenging, especially for people in a mental health crisis. And so if it's possible to have somebody, a certified peer specialist or somebody to sit with them and talk with them and get them in a place where there's not a lot of loud noise and disruptions and lights in an ER, that would be very helpful. The extent to which healthcare professionals can listen and provide and listen with empathy, that's wonderful. However, I know how strained healthcare professionals are. I have done 8 presentations to nursing students at our local community college. I spoke to a group of professionals, healthcare providers, active duty healthcare providers at Uniform Services University in 2019, and I know how stressful the work is for you all. So, but those are just my own own insights, is, having somebody empathetic to sit with them if there's a sort of, depending on the state and what what's provided, having somebody to sit with them and provide that individual support can be very helpful. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. The environment and then having a support person and listening. I think that that's really helpful. Thank you.
Right, right. And as I'm willing to speak to any, health care group or whatever, if that would be helpful, to you all can email me, probably virtually, because I'm not great at travel. But thank you. Thank you for your question. Anybody else?
We have lots of great comments in the chat, so I'll definitely save those and share those with you. And then Ellie.
Ellie.
Hi, I am actually a former brain injury nurse, and I'm curious about your experience of suicidality in individuals who have experienced traumatic brain injury or acquired brain injury, really in any form. It's something I think we don't necessarily talk about enough, is kind of the post brain injury. We always called it the serotonin crash
Yeah.
in our patients, and that leading to suicidal ideation. Is that
Mhm.
something that there's peer support resources available for those individuals?
Thank you for asking that question. Um, I I personally don't know a lot about support. I don't know as much as I would like to about support for people with TBIs, regarding suicidal ideation. But what I can say from my own personal experience is that what I shared with Ali in terms of, not having a lot of multiple distractions and loud noises, magnify that for people with traumatic brain injuries. Because I know for myself, it's it can be overwhelming when I'm in crowds. It's overwhelming when I hear fire engines go by or loud noises. Um, and, you know, and so the extent to which it can be a controlled environment. I mean, obviously you want people to be able to move forward in their recovery, how best works for them, but a supportive and not have a lot of, you know, up major changes, loud noises, that those can be very painful. I don't know if that answers your question at all, but that's about all the information I've got at this time.
No, thank you.
I
That's
wish I knew
fantastic.
more. The other thing is that, and I don't know all the details, but the, the work that's been done about chronic traumatic encephalopathy um, um, is, you know, that that is the most extreme example of people with major brain injuries, and the work that's being done on helping and supporting those people might give you more insight. I don't know if that's helpful.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you for your question. Anybody else? One last question, one last story that I can share with you guys. Um, um, Last summer, I had the joy of riding with both my children on the metro for the first time. And we went to a nearby garden, and my children surprised me. It was right around Mother's Day, with a semicolon necklace. And, and I wear this regularly when I present and whatnot, to remind me that yes, my life paused, but now I walk forward embracing life fully and embracing the joy that life offers. So thank you for being here, and thank you for all the work you do.
Thank you so much, Shannon. If everybody else can join me through reactions, comments, you have a bunch already in the chat. But thank you so much for sharing your inspiring story and just those very real, critical, and tender moments that you've had with family and community in your own story of recovery. So can't express how much this probably has landed for people in this space doing the work. And yes, you are so right. People need to start sharing, not that they haven't, but continue to share their own stories of recovery after a suicide attempt. So thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining today.
Yes.